On April 20, 1999, Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, became the scene of a nightmare that shocked the world. Two senior students, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, carried out a meticulously planned attack that left 13 people dead and more than 20 injured before taking their own lives. It wasn't just the scale of the tragedy that made headlines. It was the chilling detail and cold calculation behind it. The attack began just before lunchtime when Harris and Klebold arrived heavily armed with guns and homemade explosives. They set up bombs in the cafeteria, intending to kill hundreds, but when the devices failed to detonate, they began shooting indiscriminately at students and staff. Chaos erupted as terrified teenagers ran for their lives, hiding under desks or escaping through windows. The violence lasted less than an hour, but its impact was permanent. Families were torn apart, a community was left shattered, and the entire nation was forced to confront the reality of school shootings in a way it never had before. Columbine became a symbol of America's gun violence epidemic, sparking urgent debates on bullying, violent video games, and access to firearms. Decades later, the word Columbine is still synonymous with tragedy. It marked a turning point in school safety, law enforcement response, and the way America views the vulnerability of its classrooms. On April 16, 2007, Virginia Tech University in Blacksburg, Virginia, became the site of the deadliest school shooting in U.S. history. Seung-Hui Cho, a senior at the university, killed 32 people and wounded 17 others before taking his own life. The sheer scale of the massacre stunned the nation and forever changed how colleges approached campus security. The attack unfolded in two stages. The first began early in the morning inside a dormitory where two students were killed. Nearly 2 hours later, Cho stormed Norris Hall, chaining the doors shut behind him. Armed with two handguns, he moved classroom to classroom, opening fire on students and professors. In less than 15 minutes, dozens were killed in one of the darkest chapters in American education. Investigations later revealed Cho's long history of mental health struggles and concerning behavior. The tragedy exposed serious flaws in the mental health system and highlighted the urgent need for faster emergency alerts on campuses nationwide. The Virginia Tech massacre remains a haunting reminder that even places of higher learning, where young people should feel safe, can become the target of unimaginable violence. On December 14, 2012, the small community of Newtown, Connecticut, was devastated by one of the most heartbreaking mass shootings in history. A gunman entered Sandy Hook Elementary School and killed 26 people, 20 of them children between the ages of 6 and 7. Before taking his own life. The attack began earlier that morning when the shooter fatally shot his mother at their home. He then drove to the school, forced his way inside, and opened fire in classrooms filled with young children. Teachers and staff members tried desperately to protect their students, but the gunman's rampage left families and the entire nation shattered. The tragedy sent shockwaves around the world. Images of grieving parents and tiny coffins dominated headlines, and President Barack Obama addressed the nation with visible emotion, urging lawmakers to finally act on gun reform. While some states implemented stricter measures, attempts at sweeping federal legislation stalled, leaving many to wonder if anything would ever change. Sandy Hook became a symbol of innocence lost, a heartbreaking reminder of how even the most vulnerable, the youngest among us, are not spared from America's epidemic of gun violence. On October 1, 2017, Las Vegas became the scene of the deadliest mass shooting in modern U.S. history. During the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival, thousands of country music fans gathered for what was supposed to be a joyful night. Instead, it turned into unimaginable chaos when a lone gunman opened fire from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel. Armed with high-powered rifles fitted with bump stocks, he unleashed more than 1,000 rounds into the crowd below. In a matter of minutes, 60 people were killed and over 850 others were injured, either by gunfire or in the frantic stampede to escape. The scale of the attack stunned the nation. The shooter's arsenal was later found to include 23 firearms in the hotel room and thousands more rounds of ammunition in his home. Despite an exhaustive investigation, authorities never identified a clear motive, leaving survivors and families haunted by unanswered questions. The tragedy prompted urgent discussions about gun control, high-capacity magazines, and bump stocks, which were later banned. Yet for many, the lasting memory of that night is not the debate. It's the stories of bravery, Strangers shielded each other. First responders rushed in under fire, and ordinary people became heroes in the face of terror. June 12, 2016, marked another horrific chapter in American history when the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, became the target of a mass shooting. The club, a popular safe space for the LGBTQ+ community, was packed with over 300 people celebrating Latin Night. Just after 2 a.m., a gunman armed with a semi-automatic rifle and a handgun opened fire inside the club. 49 people were killed, and more than 50 others injured before police stormed the building and killed the attacker after a 3-hour standoff. At the time, it was the deadliest shooting in U.S. history. The attack was later classified as both a terrorist act and a hate crime, as the shooter pledged allegiance to ISIS during the assault. The tragedy struck at the heart of the LGBTQ+ community and left the entire nation grieving. Vigils were held across the world, with monuments and landmarks lit in rainbow colors to honor the victims. The Pulse shooting highlighted the dangers of hate-fueled violence and the devastating impact of extremist ideology. Today, the site of the nightclub is a memorial, serving both as a place of remembrance and as a call for unity and acceptance. It stands as a stark reminder of how hatred can shatter lives, but also how communities can rally together to heal. On May 24, 2022, Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, became the site of a tragedy that reignited a painful national debate. That morning, an 18-year-old gunman entered the school armed with an AR-15 style rifle. In just under 80 minutes, he murdered 19 children and 2 teachers inside their classrooms. The victims were as young as 9 and 10 years old. The massacre was compounded by controversy over the law enforcement response. Reports revealed officers waited over an hour before confronting and killing the gunman, despite children trapped inside repeatedly calling 911. The delay sparked national outrage and accusations of catastrophic failures in police response. The Uvalde shooting became one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history, evoking painful comparisons to Sandy Hook. Families demanded accountability, stricter gun laws, and better protection for schools. The tragedy brought renewed attention to the dangers of easy access to assault-style weapons and the urgent need for effective emergency response protocols. For the small community of Uvalde, the grief is immeasurable. Vigils, murals, and memorials now cover the town, each honoring the young lives cut short and the educators who tried to shield them. Uvalde's name is now forever etched into history alongside other heartbreaking tragedies, serving as a call for change that has yet to be fully answered. On February 14, 2018, tragedy struck Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, when a former student opened fire with a semi-automatic rifle. The attack lasted only minutes, but left 17 students and staff dead and another 17 injured, making it one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history. Chaos unfolded as terrified students barricaded classrooms, texted their families, and desperately tried to escape. Investigations revealed that multiple warning signs about the shooter had been missed. Teachers, classmates, and even the FBI had received alarming reports about his behavior, but none led to preventative action. The horrific event ignited a national debate about gun laws, mental health, and school safety, forcing Americans to confront once again the vulnerabilities of their educational institutions. In the aftermath, Parkland survivors channeled their grief into activism. Students like Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg became prominent voices in the March for Our Lives movement, which organized one of the largest youth-led protests in modern history. Their message resonated with millions across the world demanding legislative change. The Parkland shooting remains a symbol of both profound loss and the resilience of young voices. While laws have shifted slightly in some states, the broader debate about how to protect children in schools continues to divide the nation. On July 20, 2012, a midnight screening of The Dark Knight Rises in Aurora, Colorado, turned into a scene of unimaginable horror. A gunman entered the crowded theater armed with multiple firearms, setting off tear gas before opening fire on the audience. In less than 10 minutes, 12 people were killed and 70 others injured, marking it as one of the largest mass shooting casualties in U.S. history. The attack stunned the nation, especially because the victims had gathered for something as ordinary as watching a movie. Survivors described the chaos, confusion from the tear gas, the deafening gunfire, and the desperate scrambled to escape through blocked exits. Emergency services rushed to the scene, but the scale of the carnage was overwhelming. The shooter was later arrested outside the theater and stood trial in 2015. Although the jury found him guilty of all charges, he avoided the death penalty and received multiple life sentences without parole. The trial brought painful testimony from survivors and families, revealing the lifelong scars, both physical and emotional, left by that night. The Aurora shooting reignited debates over assault weapons bans, mental health care, and security in public spaces. For many, it remains a haunting reminder that violence can strike even in places meant for joy and escape. On November 5, 2017, a quiet Sunday service at the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, was shattered when a gunman opened fire on worshipers. Armed with a rifle and tactical gear, he unleashed a barrage of bullets, killing 26 people and injuring 22 more. Victims ranged from young children to elderly parishioners, making it the deadliest mass shooting in Texas history. The attacker had a history of domestic violence and should have been barred from owning firearms, but bureaucratic failures allowed him to legally purchase his weapons. This revelation sparked outrage and calls for stricter enforcement of existing gun laws. The community, devastated by the scale of the loss, became a symbol of the toll that unchecked violence inflicts on small towns. A nearby resident, armed with his own rifle, confronted the shooter outside the church, forcing him to flee. This act of bravery, followed by a high-speed chase, ended when the gunman crashed his vehicle and took his own life. Without that intervention, the toll could have been even higher. The Sutherland Springs tragedy underscored the vulnerability of places once thought to be safe havens. It also exposed systemic failures in background checks and enforcement, fueling ongoing discussions about how tragedies like this can be prevented in the future. On July 18, 1984, the quiet community of San Ysidro, California, was shattered by one of the most terrifying public shootings in American history. James Huberty, armed with multiple firearms, entered a McDonald's restaurant and began indiscriminately firing at patrons. For 77 minutes, the building became a scene of chaos and devastation. Huberty killed 21 people, including children as young as 8 months old, and injured 19 others before being fatally shot by a police sniper. At the time, this was the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. Families eating dinner, employees working their shifts, and children enjoying a summer day all became victims of senseless violence. The aftermath left San Ysidro traumatized. Survivors and families of victims struggled with grief and shock, while the community grappled with how such horror could unfold in such an ordinary setting. The McDonald's was later demolished and replaced by a memorial plaza, a solemn reminder of the lives lost that day. The San Ysidro massacre was a wake-up call, raising urgent questions about mental health, access to firearms, and law enforcement response strategies in mass shooting situations. On June 17, 2015, Charleston, South Carolina, became the site of a racially motivated act of terror when a gunman opened fire inside the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church. The congregation had welcomed him into their Bible study session, offering kindness and hospitality, only for him to betray their trust in the most horrific way possible. In an instant, a house of prayer turned into a crime scene. 9 black parishioners, including the church's pastor, Reverend Clementa Pinckney, were killed in the attack. The victims ranged from elders with decades of devotion to young members of the congregation, each life stolen while gathered in faith. The tragedy was particularly shocking because it unfolded in a place of worship, a sanctuary where people had gathered for peace, prayer, and community. The shooter later admitted that his goal was to ignite racial violence across the country. Instead, the attack prompted widespread grief, international condemnation, and a renewed dialogue about racism, white supremacy, and the prevalence of hate crimes in the United States. Images of grieving family members, community vigils, and the historic church filled media screens, amplifying the tragedy's emotional impact and sparking hard conversations about America's history of racial violence. The Charleston church shooting remains one of the darkest examples of how hatred can lead to violence. It also served as a rallying cry for movements advocating racial justice and gun control, reminding the nation that even sacred spaces can become targets when prejudice and extremism go unchecked. On August 3, 2019, El Paso, Texas, faced a nightmare when a gunman opened fire at a Walmart filled with weekend shoppers. The attack was deliberate and racially motivated, with the shooter targeting Latino immigrants and shoppers in the border city. In total, 23 people were killed and dozens more were injured. Families buying school supplies, children walking with parents, and employees doing their jobs became victims of cold-blooded hate. It was later revealed that the shooter had posted a manifesto online, echoing extremist rhetoric tied to the so-called Great Replacement conspiracy theory. The shooting devastated El Paso, a city known for its vibrant cross-border culture. Vigils, memorials, and marches filled the streets as the community stood united against hate. The attack also reignited debates about domestic terrorism, online radicalization, and the deadly consequences of unchecked extremism. The El Paso Walmart shooting remains a chilling example of how ideology-fueled violence can devastate communities in an instant. It exposed the deadly consequences of unchecked extremism, the vulnerability of public spaces, and the urgent need to confront hatred before it manifests into mass violence. Today, the city continues to heal, carrying the weight of the lives lost but also the resilience of a community determined not to be defined by tragedy. On July 4, 2022, a patriotic celebration turned into a nightmare in Highland Park, Illinois. Families gathered along the parade route, waving flags and enjoying a festive morning. Without warning, a gunman opened fire from a rooftop, sending the crowd into chaos. The attack killed 7 people and injured more than 40, many of them children and parents who had come to watch the parade. Witnesses described scenes of pure terror, parents shielding their kids, strollers abandoned in the street, and flags trampled in the rush to escape. The gunman had carefully planned the attack, disguising himself to blend in with the crowd as he fled. His capture later that day brought some relief, but the trauma of that morning left deep scars on the community. The shooting reignited debates over gun control and public safety at large gatherings. For survivors, every firework and loud sound now carries echoes of that dreadful morning. Highland Park's tragedy became yet another painful reminder of how even joyous celebrations in America can be shattered in seconds. On August 1, 1966, the University of Texas in Austin became the site of one of the earliest and most infamous mass shootings in U.S. history. Charles Whitman, a former Marine sharpshooter, climbed the university's iconic clock tower armed with rifles and shotguns. From his perch, he opened fire on students and passers-by below, striking fear into the entire city. The rampage lasted more than 90 minutes as police and civilians scrambled to take cover. Whitman killed 15 people and wounded over 30 before being shot dead by police officers who stormed the tower. The event shocked the nation and set a grim precedent for future mass shootings. This tragedy highlighted the need for better emergency response and police coordination. At the time, active shooter protocols didn't exist. The bravery of the civilians and officers who risked their lives that day helped shape the modern strategies law enforcement now use to confront mass shooters. On November 5, 2009, tragedy struck within the gates of Fort Hood, Texas, one of the largest U.S. military installations. An Army psychiatrist, Nidal Hassan, opened fire inside a processing center where soldiers were preparing for deployment. The attack left 13 people dead and more than 30 wounded in what remains one of the deadliest mass shootings on a military base. The betrayal cut deep. Soldiers who trusted their fellow officers suddenly found themselves targeted. Many survivors described the surreal horror of being gunned down in what was supposed to be a secure environment. Hassan was eventually stopped by civilian police officers stationed on base and later convicted, receiving a death sentence. The Fort Hood shooting raised tough questions about insider threats, mental health awareness, and the warning signs that went unnoticed beforehand. For military families, the attack was a reminder that even in a place of discipline and camaraderie, tragedy can strike without warning. These stories remind us of the devastating impact mass shootings leave behind: families torn apart, communities scarred, and lives forever changed. If you found this video important, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss future deep dives into history's darkest moments.